No? Okay, if I could have a motion to approve. And second it, and all in favor? Okay, we have no public to make comments, I take it. Or hold on, there's a public, oh. I see
There we
one.
have
No comments.
That's awesome.
Role of APC members in the community consultation for comprehensive planning for lots 1 and 2 of the community lands. And I think we're gonna throw in there and 3. While we're at it. So if I could just, I'll give you some opening comments. You may remember coming, some of you spoke with me at the very beginning of the term and said what we really need is to do some good comprehensive planning. And I said, oh, please, no. We've got so many things on our plate now. But now that we have worked through a lot of that stuff, right? And keeping in mind that the stuff that we worked through was stuff that really was on our plate when we arrived, right? The only thing that we really did that was different and did something was working with BC Housing to get our affordable housing project. And that has turned into a very time-consuming project, but we're getting really close. They're saying we're at the top of the pile. They're saying that we are going to get this funding and that we're going to be able to go ahead. And so now is the time that we have to say, right, where exactly would we put that? What would the access look like, right? How does this fit with all of the other priorities that we have? So I think now that we have a concrete motivating reason to know that the work that is done is going to go somewhere, right? It's going to actually translate on the ground, not be another master plan that gets looked at a decade from now and someone says, well, that doesn't make any sense, right? This is something that if we get into it now, can really have an impact over the next 2 or 3 years on the development of the community lands. So the Advisory Planning Commission, in most communities, is sort of the premier land use planning body within the municipality. And so we're meeting today to see basically what role the APC would like to have in comprehensive planning here. We're thinking of something that would be to the level of charrettes and that sort of thing. Quite a bit of, putting time and effort into it so that we actually are looking at something that isn't just a bunch of big squares with post-it notes, but really happening. So that's the broad overview of why we want to see you. Gary, did you want to?
So, if I read what you're saying, we're going back to square one.
No,
Okay.
we actually are. We're somewhere.
Yeah, no,
Right?
I understand
I mean,
that.
we've got to, for example, lot 3. Take lot 3. We know we've got to put a fire hall there. We know that we're going to put the fire hall at the north end of that site. We now know that we are going to allow space for a medical clinic next door to it. We know that we have a temporary parking lot next to that, and we have a hill behind it and a space down to the general store out on Government Road. So the parking lot, the hill, and that is something that it's probably now time to say, okay, if we want a housing component on lot 3, what would it look like? How much of this, are we looking at market, are we looking at affordable, right? Or what is the tone and style that we're trying to achieve in the area? And then you move from there to lot 2, right? So lot 2 now we have Snug Cove House, and there are 18 single units and duplexes. We've got our area 1 that's going to be 20 to 30 condos. We have the community center next to it. I mean, we're a long way, all I'm getting at, we're a long way from starting with square one. We have very hard, real components that have to be integrated into a real plan. And as I say, other than the BC Housing Project, all of those other things basically were sitting on our desks when we arrived. And now we've reached a point where we're ready to bring them to fruition. And so need to take a serious look at it. Might as well look at the the elephant in the room of Lot 1. I think we have a general agreement that the north end will just be a lot out on Green Road. I think there's general agreement that the area between Peter Printon and the Belterra would be a good place for a little neighborhood of residential. And then we come to area 1 of Lot 1. And it's a goofy thing, and you need to hear the story, right? In that I went to GDRD before that was surplus land and tried to buy it from them. And the fellow had said, well, if you'd come to us 6 months ago, you know, we would have talked to you, but we're going to have a made-on Bowen Island solution for the surplus lands, and we're negotiating with the municipality. Now, what motivated me to go to him at the time was the fact that I had businesses on the island. I mean, there was, Bowen Island Interiors was a flooring store on Bowen Island. There was no place on Bowen that I could have my own shop, right? Literally didn't exist. I had a choice. I could rent from Wolfgang Duntz, I could rent from Doug Berry. There was no land zoned on this island that I could build. I could try to build in Snug Cove, but I couldn't put in parking. Right? I mean, it was literally, you were screwed. You couldn't do it. And I looked at privately owned land, and people laughed at me. They said, do you know how much you can get for residential land? I mean, why would I let you build a store there when I can sell that, you know, for X, at the time it was a lot lower than today, but way, way more money than I was willing to spend. So I talked to other people about why does this happen, what's the story? And the thing is, light industrial land is defended like agricultural land. You can't keep it in a community because there's no money in it. Everybody wants it to go into residential. Or the other thing that happened was you had, I don't know if you're familiar with Morgard and Company, when REITs came in and you had these investment vehicles, they ran out and bought every piece of industrial land that they could find, and then everything became rental again. So my point being that at the time, I recognized the need for some land to be on Bowen for that purpose, and it looked like it was a fairly general thing other places. I found a strange ally in Bayak, in the arts community. They had their cultural master plan, and a big key component of it at that time was retaining island culture. That we had more artists and craftsmen and that sort of thing living on the island, and if we weren't going to get sucked up into the city, we had to supply places where people could actually work. And the idea at the time was, well, if you've got 5 acres of land, you can use it for industrial use, right? Well, a 5-acre homestead is now a 5-acre estate. You know, it's like the world has really changed, this part of the world, as far as what it's feasible to put on a piece of property. Right? So, of course, nothing ever happened. The thing died. My dream of buying that land and doing it, but it always stayed in plans. In 2010, in the OCP update, it talks about getting together with business people on Bowen Island to find a suitable location. There was a 2012 or 2013 plan done by a committee of council looking at the surplus lands that included this as a project. And when we started our term and we started talking about surplus lands, I said, you can't have me involved with it, right? I mean, this was my baby from way back. It didn't work for me. I have no interest in doing it personally. This isn't going to happen. But I was encouraged to continue with it, right? But now we've reached a point where the logic of how we got here has been forgotten. I mean, that has been lost in the mist of time, but for most people. And the vision of Bowen now, retirement community, suburb of West Van. You know, that there's a lot of people that say, we don't need light industrial, right? We don't need shops. We don't, you know, why would we want that? We should have nice houses. It's a nice place to live. And you go across the water and the people in West Van saying, you know, every tradesman that works here has to come from Surrey. And Langley, nobody lives in West Vancouver that works in West, you can't get a school teacher or a fireman, right? So I think there is a reason and an impetus to want a light industrial area here. I don't think you can get it on private land. Having said all that, it's not something that I want to fight, want to die for, right? If the rest of the community doesn't care for it. So what I'm proposing is, one, starting this discussion about whether or not to have light industrial on there may bring some private property owner out who'll say, hey, the municipality will give us a hell of a break somewhere here if we create some industrial land. If somebody comes forward, then it probably is not the highest and best use for that land if you can put in light industrial somewhere else. So, I mean, if that would end the discussion, I think, probably pretty quickly, right? The other thing is that maybe there is no market for it, right? Maybe there's just nobody is interested. But I'd like to talk to the business people. I'd like to talk to the suppliers and so on. Because it strikes me that if you could have a 1,000 square foot, 16-foot high ceiling shop work area as a tradesperson on Bowen Island. I know that there used to be a flooring store on Bowen Island, and if that piece of property had been available for the flooring store, you would be able to buy your hardwood and carpet on this island today rather than having to go to New Westminster to get it, right? And a lot of other entrepreneurial people. I ran into a couple that wanted to move here, and they did custom millwork downtown. Beautiful high-end stuff. They ended up moving out to Aldergrove because they couldn't afford the rents in town, and they didn't like living in the city. They were friends of Julie and Christoph and they just said, you know, where would I set up on Bowen? This would be such a nice place to live, and we could have our little shop. Too far in the weeds for you? Okay, dear. She does this for me.
You started off with what role the APC would like to play.
Yes, and we're going to get back there
in the
right now.
discussion of the surplus lands. And you mentioned charrettes, and the implication was that there would be community consultation, that there would be a role for the folks around this table. And in some of the points that you made, Murray, the light industrial near to your heart, I don't think we know whether there's interest in light industrial. And one of the resolutions that came out of discussion at the Committee of the Whole two weeks or so ago, we had a very lively Committee of the Whole that was looking at Lot 1, and it was followed up by a very lively council meeting at the end of 8 hours of talking about Lot 1. We were no longer very lively, but we had a lot of clarity around some of the things that needed to be done going forward. And one of the resolutions dealt with convening a meeting of people who would be potential users of a light industrial lot and those who might be interested in it. So we've got that in place as part of a number of consultations with different parts of the community, and going forward with that, but making it more not so much your baby as part of the getting community feedback on the need for light industrial. And the other point about maybe somebody will surface and say, oh, you can use my private land if the municipality's going to give him or her a break. I mean, the municipality can also ask for somebody to surface and give an indication of the kinds of breaks that person might be given. So if those two things go forward at the same time, the information that comes forward can help kind of clarify whether Lot 1 really is as big an elephant in the room, or if there are other ways to deal with that. But to, again, go a little farther back, it really is. The purpose of this meeting, I think, was to talk about the role of the APC members and what they'd like to do and what the heck the community consultation would be that you guys would see as planning people.
Yeah.
So maybe I could speak to that, at least from my perspective as the chair. Because where you spoke sort of glowingly about what advisory planning commissions throughout the province do. I'm not quite sure that they do what you say they do. I know the mandate that we've been given, I think it's quite clear. It has to do with providing feedback to council when requested on matters to do with the land use bylaw and the OCP. This is related to that, but what you're asking, I think, is quite a different exercise.
Yes, very much so.
The APC is a lay body. It's not a group of planners. We're fortunate to have a planner in our midst, but otherwise, the group is not necessarily trained as planners. So, undertaking a master planning exercise for large parcels of land, I think is, while I'm sure that the APC would be very much in favor of joining into that conversation, I don't think the APC should be leading that conversation. That's my view. I don't know if the rest of the group feels that way.
Right. Okay.
I also have a full-time job.
No,
That's
fair
okay.
enough. Fair enough. No,
But being involved in the process, being part of charrettes to some extent, I mean, all of that I can see that, people are sitting on the APC because they have an interest in the community, in the land of the community.
right.
So they would have an interest in the process. But I really think that master planning of large parcels of land is something that should be given to individuals who have the expertise and the training to do that in consultation with the community.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I was relating right back to what, the meeting that I had with the, were you not part of it? I'm sorry, I can't remember who came to visit with me from the APC, but specifically asked that, there should be a planning process here for Snug Cove in this area, and we should be doing it. Do you remember that?
Oh, that was, it was a discussion because we've done all these plans.
Right.
And yet, they're still all over the place. There were some good plans done,
Mm-hmm.
but yet decisions were sort of made independently of the plans. And I think what we were, as a group, were a little frustrated with was that we've got all this background, but yet there's nothing sort of consolidated. And what we were looking to do, I think at that point, was just do a little bit of diagramming of opportunities and stuff, and sort of focus back on what we've got and then what to do with it. I think it was just frustrating because things were just sort of happening and it seemed willy-nilly. And so that was a bit frustrating for the group. And I think that's where we came out of. We wanted to take a look at the plans as a group and sort of get a feeling for where we could head. Not necessarily do a final plan, but at least come up with some kind of maybe consolidated diagram or something for the code. Because, I mean, we've got such a limited resource of developable land within walking distance of the code, and yet we're sort of nibbling away at it as things come up. We sort of say, oh, let's go there. Bonk. And so that doesn't seem like a very effective way to approach development.
Yeah, fair enough.
I think there is a logic behind this, but I think the problem behind the decisions that have been made, and I think that part of the problem is that logic hasn't been made clear, and the big picture isn't isn't clear to the community, certainly to the community. And even some decent visuals that consolidated the community lands so that the anticipated uses for each of the lots, that would be helpful. And then I really like your point about sort of sketching it out and then looking for opportunities, because even if everything that had been discussed in the mayor's standing committee and is, you know, embedded in bylaws already, there was all sorts of room in there to accommodate other needs. And part of what's happening at the moment is that when people express an interest, there isn't a sort of a venue where that can be captured and considered, you know, as a possibility. I mean, I'm thinking about, you know, the skate park on Lot 2. I mean, that came up. The bike park on Lot 2, that came up. And we found a spot for the bike park. That land could have been used for something else.
Still can.
Still can, yeah. And I'm nothing against the bike park, but it's just that there might have been other places.
So what Dennis is speaking to long-term planning has its challenges too, you know, because the needs of the community change. You know, what we're faced with now, when I was at the business summit last month, what's the big issue on Bowen is the big issue everywhere, but it's a particularly big issue on Bowen, is there's no, I don't even like the term affordable housing, there's no housing for people who are supporting the community, who are working in the stores and the restaurants and those kinds of things. There's almost no rental housing, and what's there is ridiculously overpriced. And so housing is a big deal. Now, 10 years ago, maybe it wasn't such a big deal. You know, things didn't cost that much. There was enough, you know, the community was a different community. The demographics were way different than they are now. So the long-term plan is to kind of look long-term, and it's got to try to anticipate some of those things. Some of the issues that Murray has brought up in his preamble are maybe in 2018 are not such big issues anymore. Maybe there are different. There's a different focus. There are different priorities that need to be addressed now. I think the other thing, there's and I mentioned this the other night, they're erroneously called surplus lands. They're not surplus to anyone, but they are called community lands. And I think it's really important to recognize that the lands are for the community, which means that whatever use gets attached to them should be for the community. It shouldn't be for the particular interest of a particular developer or of a small interest group. It should be something, you know, the community center is a great example because it's a truly community-centric project, which will, I think, generate, you know, waves of other kinds of projects coming out of that. And I think, so I think this is something that needs to be kind of, how the uses are attached to the land need to be taken, need to be considered very carefully. It's easy to say, we'll make it all housing, or we'll make it all, housing is an important need right now, and it will continue to be an important need, but do we want to take a couple of little postage stamp pieces and make them into community centers and skateboard parks, and then turn everything else into housing? I'm not sure that that's the answer either. Should the community really be the ones, should the municipality be providing land for housing? I'm not convinced that that's even true. And if they are, what's the methodology by which the housing is going to be delivered? You know, City of Vancouver's got great examples in South Falls Creek of long-term lease land. There's lots of First Nation land that's operated that way as well. Is that what the municipality is talking about? Or you want to sell the land? You know, or is there some mix of those things? I think the delivery of the land and where that's all going, that needs to be considered right along with everything else. Because if you don't have a plan for divesting of the land or how it will be used, how it will be held onto, then the plan's missing a big piece.
Drew, how do you think the APC can help us?
help in this general process. Well, again, I mean, I go back to, I think there's, as Dennis says, so the first thing is, there's been a lot of planning, right? Is it comprehensive? Is it strategic? Is it too old? Is it, I don't know. But there needs to be an assessment of kind of what's been done and a recognition then of where we need to go from that place. You know, because there are some amazing chunks of work that have been done for the whole area of the code that include all of these lands that are just languishing, right? And then it feels like we're gonna, well, let's rethink this. And that seems to me to be, well, it's counterintuitive. It's kind of like, we don't need to rethink it or rethink it. A lot of the thinking has been done, unless it really doesn't fit with the needs of the community in 2018.
Oh, that's the key.
Good job.
Can I just quickly, Daniel prepared a community lands workshop for council in 2016, and he basically pulled all of that material together and provided commentary on it, and it was council's starting point for thinking about the community lands as a whole. So the legwork to bring that material together, it's done, and it could be shared.
Which would be from, sorry, John, which would, from the APC perspective, that would be outstanding.
Okay.
Be a great place for us to step in. Instead, we get referrals on a, as to use Dennis's term, piecemeal basis. Here's a part of this piece of community land. We want to do this on it. What do you think? Well, it seems okay. What's, you know, but we don't have the bigger picture. So it would be very useful to have that information.
But that's why we're here too.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We need your help.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
So yeah, very much it should be like a
Great.
two-way street. So, Johnson.
You mentioned the body of work, you know, that's been done in the past, and I was involved in some of that, and a lot of it's 10 years old. And I've watched the ground shift under my feet massively over the last 5 to 10 years, certainly in the last 5, even in the last 3. If I was rezoning Grafton Lake starting today, it would be different.
Right.
Because things have changed so much. So I really think it's very hard to keep up with the times at the moment, and a real struggle for this council. A little bit of history, if we go back to the beginnings of the standing committee and decisions around Lot 1, and the intent, at least from my perspective, was let's sell off some little pieces, get enough money together and pay off the surplus lands debt, because that would be a major achievement. There hasn't been done in 10 years. So we kind of focused on Area 1. There was one possibility. The previous council had already headed on that road. The land up between Belterra and Peter Crinton's, little piece, not going to affect the grand body of lands, right? And a little bit down at the far end of Green Road. And in my mind, collectively, those 3, I think we can go down the surface lands debt if you just pull off that. Well, it's better than that. Just how things are going with Area 1 and values, and nothing's happened yet, but the numbers that are being looking real, you know, to pay off the surplus lands debt. And Lot 1 sits, the main body of Lot 1, you know, is headed towards light industrial and other uses. At the time, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, sure, that seems reasonable enough. So that's where that all started. But in the last 2-3 years, I've sat back and watched the fire hall show up, take out an acre of prime land, and I'm not saying that's a bad decision, I'm just saying that took out an acre of prime land. The parking, I think it was a great idea, a great decision, but for the short term, medium term, that ain't going away. And the public's looking at that. Gone. Medical club just showed up. It's gone. And as these things are happening, what's going on is, even though council is allowing 700 lots on the island to have secondary homes, even though there's, you know, Steve Bellringer's working on a rental project over there, and this 30-unit condo thing, all this, there's a major amount of Grafton Lakes happening up there. And there's a lot of things in the works that the public doesn't see. They don't see any housing, and they're not gonna see it, or think about it, or read it, or understand it until it's physically being built.
Right.
And until then, they're gonna scream that we need housing. And now, on top of all this fire hall parking, medical clinic, community center, now we're gonna turn all the lot 1 into light industrial. And we still haven't figured out where the people are gonna live. And so now we're upset. And the community they're surfacing. And I hear it loud and clear.
Mhm.
And the community doesn't feel like they're being heard. Because really, they're not. So it would be really good, take a step back, take a pause, invite everybody to the table, and do what we did, and Gary, you remember, at Count Point 12 years ago or whenever it was, we had a shred. We invited like 50 people,
Yep.
every community group, every noisy voice in the community, professionals, planners, architects, all of that. Anybody who had an idea that wanted to get it out there, and you have it like a 2-day. This isn't and it's just like you said, Dennis, about diagrams. And you explain to them, the beginning of the first day, here's the lands, here's what's going on. Murray can explain what council's been doing and where the thinking is. Then you take them out and you walk them through the lands. And you have professionals like BC Housing and all these different speakers come in and say, this is what we can do for you. So just lay it all out there. And then have the next day, planning session. And divide everybody up into groups and charrettes, and 5 different tables, 5 different rooms, so they can look at each other's plans.
No cross pollination.
Because, and mix everybody up so no interest group drives the plan too hard. And listen to everybody for 2 days. And the outcome of a 2-day session would be maybe 3 plans, maybe 5 plans. But everybody's been heard. And you can walk out of that and build on it. And the council can move forward however they choose to with their planners, based on a foundation of listening to the community. And right now, that's the angst that I think is in this community, that is not a good place to be at any point in time.
Well, I totally agree with that strategy. I think that'd be the way to pull everything together and have some kind of gravitas to it, that people have talked about. We've got all the ideas out on the table, and we've sort of worked toward consolidating a real strategy. I think one of the big elephants in the room, though, is this housing piece for workers and the affordability issue. And both in terms of what is the real short-term demand and long-term demand to make sure that we can accommodate workers on the island. So we need to set aside, we need to have some numbers like that. Is it 20 units? Is it 50 units? Is it 200 units? And are they big, small? Should we try to accommodate just single workers or families and this whole thing? There's that kind of, we don't, and then there's that, we need some clarity on that or some kind of idea. Then we need to have, what are the mechanisms that we can achieve this? I mean, when we talk about affordability here, generally affordability is really not affordable for workers. It just doesn't work out that way. So we've got to, as a municipality, I think, leverage land that we own to virtually create.
Subsidize.
Yes, you can subsidize it with the land, get BC housing and all the other tricks and techniques to actually make it happen, to get it to a point where we can really genuinely accommodate workers.
Yeah,
I think that's an interesting perspective, and it's a perspective. Because I'm not entirely convinced that the municipality should be in the business
No.
of providing housing.
I don't know that they provide the housing. I think they can utilize land to help reach that.
Even the land, I think there's a question about the land.
Yeah, I think that's a really big question. I'm not sure why all the housing needs to be on muni land in the code.
Yeah.
The
It
municipality-
makes no sense to
The
me.
municipality has the power to enact bylaws and to come up with creative solutions within the context of their zoning bylaw to be huge incentives for people to want to develop. So, and that would be on private land.
Yeah.
And so they've not to give anything. All they've done is they've gone through a particular incentive mechanism within the context of the zoning bylaw, and suddenly, well, I'm gonna take my land and I'm gonna build an apartment on it, because I can.
See, this is why, if you
Yeah.
have a 4-hour morning session, and you can get up, and the APC will have their 15 minutes where they can express all these things. Because right here, around this room, there's 6 different opinions. And within the community, there's 100 more.
Mhm.
And we're never going to agree, but we need a forum to get it out. Feel like you've said it and been listened to, and then build on that.
Right.
But we're never going to create a plan. It's not going to be like,
That everyone's gonna go, oh yeah, that's it,
that's
checks all the
perfect.
boxes.
It's just, let's get it all on the table, discuss it, come up with some 3 or 4 general ideas, and go from there. That's the best you can do. I mean, and council can honestly say, we listened to you,
Right.
and we really did listen.
So
And
I
I think if this council sort of takes a pause now, stops, and does that, they're gonna be applauded for it.
So John, so I support also with Dennis, I support the approach that you're proposing. I guess my question, to bring it back into the context of who's doing what, because I think that this meeting is a little bit about who's doing what. Is this something that is he gonna lead a charge here, or, so he's the planner, and he's gonna set up the charrettes and this weekend thing, and he's gonna arrange for all the graphics, and we'll all come in with our felt pens, or is someone else needed in
You
this
need a
process?
facilitator.
Right, that's
To
what I
have to
think
come
too.
in and do it. But I think between these 2 committees that sit here, we could create a little subcommittee and work with staff, and that's up to Kathy, to come up with kind of what do we want to do, and get a facilitator and come in, and what is the outcome we're looking for.
Right.
And, that way, that's the contribution I'm seeing from the, I know you'd love to be part of that, I'm thinking.
Oh, yeah.
I can't wait. It's gonna be really important how big the discussion is, because if it's only about the community lands and it's not in the context of what the council can or can't do anywhere else,
Yeah.
then it makes no sense at all. It has to be built in a bigger context, what needs to be near the cove, what can be somewhere else. Will the council be open to zoning to allow things to happen elsewhere? Because if you just talk about
Incentives,
community
yeah.
lands, then it's way too small. It doesn't talk about what's going on in the whole area, and then you can carve off, you can say, okay, we want all this stuff in the code. There's a whole bunch more of the island, and there's a whole bunch of things that don't need to be anywhere near the code.
And I think Murray mentioned that at the beginning, as far as the light industrial. Just knowing that it could be somewhere else
Yes.
opens up the possibilities for what's
That's
left.
exactly what happened in our meeting on Monday night, because we were looking at that property in the light industrial proposal for it.
Yeah.
And in light of the demand, some of it real, some of it imagined, for housing, our feeling was, this is a site, you know, where you can walk to the cove. So is it the right place to put an industrial, a light industrial zone in, and the potential of, you know, some of the big box events? Or should we really still be focusing on putting housing here so that people, you know, and it's by the school, there's a bunch of other reasons why, you know, that the right thing is probably to have housing there, and probably it would be on some kind of affordable housing. And for me then, so that, to that question, yeah, the island is a bigger place, and there's potential to rezone parts of the island for other uses, and again, in a context of a larger discussion.
I think though, because the island's a very good conversation. I mean,
Yeah, I don't think that's for the whole
the
island.
surplus land is big enough.
Right.
Just lots 1, 2, and 3 being talked about is more than we can all probably handle in 2 days. But knowing that we're not excluding the opportunity to do these things in other
Right.
places. And
I think you
forcing them all to
can
happen.
enter into a weekend like that with a completely empty slate.
Yeah.
I think you gotta go in with a plan so that you're getting feedback on that, as opposed to going in with, what do you think? 'Cause that-
Yeah, well, we are, because, you know, like Murray, I think that would be a role for the mayor to sit up and say, this is all the lands, here's the big, really easy to read maps, and here is what's happening.
Mhm.
Like the fire hall is there, that's happening.
Right.
The medical clinic decision has been made, that would be part of the discussion. The community center is sitting here, because these people, some of them won't even know these lands at all.
Right.
And so it's not that blank. There's certain things that aren't going away. There's certain pieces that have been filled in. And the majority of the conversation will be around, you know, what else is going to happen.
I think the other thing, apart from the use of the land, and this is something that comes up in our discussions in the APC fairly regularly, and for me it's really important, would be important to bring into that context, is not just the land, but the circulation to and around that land. Where are the vehicles? Because, you know, people who don't do developments, they don't realize, you know, when you put in I don't know, build a library, and you meet the zoning criteria for parking, you double how much land you need, if not tripling.
Use community center as an example.
Well, in the community center, that hat's over there. The community center,
That's a
the
good
requirement for that building is 33 parking stalls. There's a room in that building which is designed to hold 180 people. The math is not exactly, you know, and people who are lay people in the community are coming to, you know, open houses and going, there's not enough parking here, you know, and so that needs to be, that we can't just kind of bury our heads in the sand around that. Yeah, it's great, there's going to be other modes of transport going forward, but parking is going to be an issue, and I don't think we should be putting the community at risk by having to cross busy roads or do other crazy things because there's no parking related to a facility that's being built. And the other part of that, on that particular property, is access onto the property. It's a big parcel. It would be a shame, in my view, if the access going to the community center became a road which then accessed the rest of the site.
Superhighway.
Suddenly, it's dividing the school, and all of the users of that community center from the school have to cross this busy road to get to the facility, and that to me doesn't, you know, and there are other ways to get there. But so these are things I think that also need to be talked about in this context. You can't just sort of take a parcel of land and say, we're gonna make that housing, check, that's done. It needs to be the next layer of thinking about it.
And I think what you mentioned at the very beginning about the different roles, like I remember the standing committee talking about, like, one of the objectives was to sell off the land to pay off the surplus debt, but ensure that however you do that, you're achieving a community goal, or delivering something the community needs.
Right.
And it's not always money, like you said, it's community needs, and it has to be looked at. That needs to be, well discussed as well,
Right.
right up front, so people don't feel It's like some of the previous work that was done on lot one was how do you get the most money out of it? And that's like 100 single-family lots.
You
You
can,
know,
Sure.
is that what we want today? No, we
Right.
want to do something different.
Yeah.
So there's more important things than just money.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and particularly in this context, I mean, they're community lens.
I think, Marlene, you were wanting to jump in there for a while.
And I just wanted to respond to something that Dennis said about the housing for workers piece and the importance of that and getting some clarity around what the numbers would be. I see that as sort of similar to getting clarity around what the numbers might be of people who would be interested in the light industrial usage. The Economic Development Committee is going to be meeting with probably 20 business people in about 2 weeks' time. We initiated something that was a complete bust, and we're having a breakfast meeting just to talk in general. And what we found at the business summit was the latter part of the business summit was largely focused on housing for workers. So it's an opportunity for us to dig in a wee bit, to get a bit more clarity in a different context. But also, it's dead easy to do a survey of business owners on the island and to get that information. We have historical information from 2006, I guess it is, 2007, from the needs assessment that was done at that time. It was estimated at around 50 spaces were needed for workers, and I can only assume it's greater now.
Yeah, and the other thing is, we need to plan not for just today, we need to plan for
Yep.
20, 30 years, 50 years out, and so that we don't cut off prematurely our ability to grow.
One thing I'd like to add, that I'd like to see as part of this conversation, partly because it's sort of a pet interest of mine, but also because I think it's really important to the community, is that I think we need to include a discussion, which may be part of the charrette process, about building typology. So what I mean by that is, if you're familiar with the term, the typology is just kind of like what the building form is like, what the general massing is. So, and for most of my work is rural. I don't work very much in the city. I work in the city, you do projects which are pretty high density. You know, the zoning is there to allow for a 4-story building, which is maybe 3 stories of residential over commercial on a main street, or 4 stories of residential on a non-main street, or a high-rise tower, something like that. Those typologies are dense. They're, if you're in the 4-story range, you're building wood frame, that's relatively economical construction, and you're delivering units of housing relatively cheaply, and they don't take up a whole lot of land. However, it's an apartment building, and the most effective one of those is the double-loaded corridor scenario. You probably know what they are. You know, you go down the hallway and there's units on each side, and they're all the same, right? But boy, is that efficient. And so there's reasons why that has happened. And affordability, and they don't take up very much land. So that's great, but is that what we want? You know, is this rural community, this island community, a place where we want to have apartment buildings? Or do we want to say, no, the biggest building we want to see has 6 units in it? Nothing bigger than that, or 8 units, I don't know what it is. But there's some, and that has a particular look to it, which is different from a 30-unit apartment building. I'm not saying that one is right or wrong or anything, but there may be a lot of people in the community who have some pretty strong feelings about that. I think there's, you know, so it's something that I think we should add to the mix. Why? Because if we decide that the biggest thing you can build is a duplex, you need a lot more land to build 50
It will
duplexes.
never be affordable.
Well, right, whatever it is, but I'm just,
That is one of my concerns with underutilization of the little land that we do have in the code.
Right.
Because if we make, and this is just my opinion, if we make the decision to build 6plexes or townhouses or some sort of low-rise thing, Well, I know for a fact, not for a fact, but I think, 10 years from now, you're gonna see the 5-story and 6-stories somewhere out of the cove.
Right.
Because we're gonna need them, and we're gonna need to put the people somewhere. And all you're doing is delaying.
The inevitable, yeah.
It's just like Artisan Square exists up at Artisan because they couldn't do it in the cove.
Right.
And it would work a lot better if it was the cove.
You're right, and it's gonna wreck the code, but, yeah.
So don't underdo,
Yeah,
don't build 2 stories in the cove. That
but
would
it's
be
still, but I
shame.
think you see, John, this, I think is a key part of this conversation.
Yeah.
Because when you're looking at large parcel of land that's gonna be parceled down in smaller pieces, you know, how big do those pieces need to be? Well, it's gonna depend on the typology
Yeah.
of the buildings within the use that are going on the land. That's why I think it's all part of that. So there's that, there's the, you know, parking requirements, and all of that help to determine how big those pieces need to be and where they need to be.
Another thing we haven't mentioned, and I know we're getting too far into it, but seniors.
Right.
And Bowen Court is potentially part of this discussion, the redevelopment of Bowen Court,
Yeah.
and a lot too. And if there's something we're gonna need to think about, it's the seniors population over
Sure.
the next 20 years.
Hell yeah.
We'll all be there.
We're all going to town, and figure it out here now.
Yeah,
so.
So let me jump in for a second, do a bit of devil's advocate stuff. I'm a great believer in incrementalism, right? And I think absorption rate is a huge issue on Bowen. Right now, it looks like we could absorb a hell of a lot, right? But if we had 80 units of housing on this island, we probably would be overbuilt, right? I mean, our needs are as wide as any other community, but the depth is not very deep. You know, you only have 8 restaurants, not 80 type of thing that you're looking at. So, and as far as things like typology, basically, it's as much density as the community will take today, right? I mean, that is we know that eventually Snug Cove, we want it to be built out as the highest density area. It is the village core. We want all of these things have come up over and over again in plan after plan. And I've been looking at them since 1985. Probably the first big one that I saw come out. And we had visioning processes and going out to UBC and using a big computer for what would the cove look like if we actually built to those densities and so on. So I think the density thing really is as much as the community will take for today. And we know that 5 years from now, we'll live in a different world, or 10 years from now, or 15 years from now. We can only absorb a certain number of units between now and then anyway. So I'm not that against looking at broad blocks of land and say, well, how many could we do? Living in today's world, how many could we do? Because then you start to get an idea of, do you need lot 1 for residential? Right? If we are ultimately going to use that lot 1, area 1 for residential, it's not going to be for a long time. Right? Nobody has done the legwork yet. We don't know what the septic carrying capacity is. All of that sort of stuff. There's just a ton of detail work that we would have had to do to put that in the zoning. And I hate to be critical of your group, except to just say, well, let's just change that to residential, with none of the background work that you would require any developer to have done to take it to this point. But I mean, in a way I don't mind, because it's not going to happen right now anyway. Right? It is further down the road, and really what we're trying to do here is to start the discussion. We have 12 years with no process. Now people say, you want to do this overnight. I say, no, we're not selling this land to anybody. Right? We're giving this thing first reading, and we're starting these discussions. And this is how we're going to get going. But I guess my point is, whether you're looking at a 50-year plan, whether you're looking at what the ultimate build out of Bowen Island would be, whether you're looking at the should we be using community land for housing or shouldn't we, these are sort of decisions that will have to be made incrementally as we go along, as the need is there, as the projects come up. But what we're looking at today, I think, is to give a little bit of certainty to the community that there is a process in play. You know, that we are thinking about these things, just as we thought about visioning in 2004 and did the 20-year plan that nobody now can remember exactly which that one was, right? But it did inform the decisions along the way. And you know, where the fire hall is, where the medical, like, these things are not really in a vacuum. They look like it to today. And I think what I'm getting at is I want to try to bring the community back up to date, that there's a process, there's something happening. These are some maps that are done, these are some visions that have been had. But I don't know that we are going to be able to make decisions on density and uses in a very finite way, going across the island and looking at this very, very big conversation, except in very general terms.
I don't think anyone is suggesting that.
No, but again, it's I'm trying to just sort of bring the thing into a context of trying to figure out what are we going to do with the charrette, right? Are we just talking about the cove? Or are we just talking about our land? Are we talking short-term, long-term? Kathy and then Maureen.
I just have a curiosity question, because I've heard from both you, Kirsty and Drew, that it's not necessarily housing you'd like to see on community lands. And what is it you would like to see done with the community lands?
It's not that housing shouldn't be on the community lands, but I think that, in my mind, the Cove is really like a SkyTrain station. It is the communication hub, and there's certain things that work around the communication hub that need to be there. And that includes all sorts of service people that come up from the city, so medical center, anything that you know, dentists, all of that kind of stuff that people come up from the city, including a community center, because you get people brought in, all that kind of stuff. Housing doesn't have to be there. And I really think that the municipality shouldn't be responsible for making housing on their land. I think it's a path that you go down that the municipality can't afford to do. And there is a lot of land on this island, not a lot of it is buildable, but there's always been you can't make any density anywhere or do anything anywhere because we really don't want any people on the island. And that, to my mind, is sort of the general loudmouth people that speak. And if we don't have an idea of, you know, you can't just say, you know, we're not going to welcome anybody here. You've got to be reasonable about it, or maybe you don't, but it would be nice. But however many people we have on the island, the stuff around the Cove needs to basically be a service center. And industrial doesn't need to be service center. There can be other retail areas on the island, that's fine, but the service component, I think, needs to be around here. Service component means you have to have parking, you have to have transportation, you have to have, and that, you can help do that with our own lands and also by incenting the private developer. And that, I just think we leap into the, oh God, housing's so important, so we better do it. Or, you know, and that, I don't think we, the municipality, should have to do all that. So anyway, that's my thought, which might be different than Drew's, but.
Thank you.
At first blush, it's just a philosophical,
Yeah.
you know, I just, philosophically, I think, what's the municipality doing in the development business? The municipality shouldn't be in the development business. The municipality should be in the business of providing things that the municipality needs, whatever they may be, whether that's parking or whether that's you know, a different library venue, or whether it's, I don't know. I mean, I was in Ganges last week, as it happens, and you know, it's a really vibrant little community on an island. So there's lots of things in common with Bowen. And you know, you'd have to walk around and go, well, yeah, what we really need is a really great hardware store that's in the Cove, not out there, or you know, whatever it is, or I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
You know, that makes the place hum. And yeah, sure, there's housing right around Ganges and somewhat in Ganges as well. So it's a lot of things, but you know, I'd have to sit down and make a list.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, you know, and I think there's a role even for the municipality in the housing game if they want to do it. But that's why I was asking about the implementation piece. Like, what role does the municipality want? Do they want to be developers? Probably not. Do they want to sell land, or do they want to lease land? Those seem to be kind of their options, right? And if they lease land, then they're going to get some, there's going to be some income coming in for that, and they've zoned the land, so there's some control over what's going to occur on it in consultation with. So I think there's been way too many Stud Cove studies done, that sort of done. And I think until we get the ferry marshalling out of the cove, we're going to have a problem that will never go away.
I mean,
This is just about listening, not input. What we're trying to talk about,
Right.
this charrette, and the community listening
Exactly.
session is what
Right.
this is. How it, and that's listening to all those possible ways of doing it,
Right.
but not actually saying we're gonna do it this way.
Yeah.
But
Well, I think that we also need to think what next after the listening session, because I think there's a certain point when you've got to sort of put a logical plan together, because I agree with both Kirsty and Drew that it's a variety of uses that really need to be in close proximity to the code. Now, that's going to include certainly housing for the elderly, housing for workers, so that we don't have to then try and deal with the transportation system to carry people to the code for services. So it, taking and certainly providing adequate parking in the area. That was one of the frustrations of the downtowns we were finding, is there's no place to park. We've been looking at alternate ferry lines downtown. I mean, it's sort of, just sort of, whoops, no parking. And the provision of the city doing that really great parking lot has helped an awful lot. But, so there is a point where we can hear everybody, but we've still got to put a sort of a logic together, to be able to, go ahead and zone, with a variety of things. And if you, Drew makes a good point, if we do a long-term lease, it's a long-term income to the community, and we have more control over it as development occurs, under the umbrella of a particular evolving plan for the really precious land around the cove. So it's a complex thing, but we need to try and get some kind of clarity and some kind of strategy out of this exercise at some point, to be able to really sort of move forward and start making some decisions.
Right. Well, when we went through this exercise at Cowan Point years ago, that was our role as the developer, to take what we heard and figure out how to implement it and all of that. In this case, it's municipal property, it's council, it's staff, and it's kind of their role, I think, to decide what to do with that information. And I think to keep it simple, let's just get that done. And then, once you've done it, figure out what the next step is. And one of the big benefits here is the whole community understands the decisions haven't been made. Gonna listen first, and then take all of that and then go in and whatever it is, and we don't know until we do it.
Yeah, I think synthesis will actually be simpler than it sounds. I think there will be some pretty clear messages coming out of a process like that will say, yeah, we need to do this here, and we definitely don't want to do that there. I think there will be, they may be quite general, but that level of synthesis, I think, will be relatively.
I totally believe that. I mean, at Grafton, I threw it out to the community. What do you want to do?
Yeah.
they arrived at the same place pretty much as I was already at after I'd studied it for a long time.
Right.
Because common sense, when you're informed and you get all that information, it's hard to ignore what makes sense.
Right.
I think it'll come together.
I think another issue is we have to be realistic about this. I mean, you say, sure, we don't want any apartment buildings, and it's in the OCP, and it's probably under zoning bylaws and everything else, that we can't have apartments, but if you want low-cost housing, you have to have some form of apartment. If you want to house people in the service industry, they've got to be in apartments. So don't come to council and say, hey, you're not doing anything about housing, when if we try to do something about housing, you reject that notion. As far as council is concerned, we can be doing a lot of things on the side for the private sector. Is we can have some tax incentives for renting out rooms in your house or something like that. We should be rezoning for tiny houses. We should be thinking about manufactured homes. When we've got trailer parks, there are a lot of trailer parks on the island. Well, I'm sorry, but there's a lot of people in this world that live in trailer parks. And if you want a little pristine society that doesn't involve this, then you're going to pay the price for that. And that's the big part of it, is we have to think differently than we are.
Yeah.
But again, on that type of thing, once you take your 4 acres of land, or whatever it is, one, you find something level enough for that you can pad out properly to actually have it. Figure out what the septic requirements are, the water, the electrical, and so on. Look at what it's going to cost to do it, how much you're going to be able to lease those pads out for, what your market is going to be over the fullness of time. And then look at what you could get if you just banged it off into 4 lots and sold 4 1-acre lots on Bowen for $400,000 each. You say, well, how long would it take me to make $1.6 million in my trailer park? Right? I mean, that's the...
Yeah, but you're talking apples and oranges.
My stepbrother's in the caravan ownership business. He's got 3 parks, a couple in England,
Right.
and he'd buy one and turn it into a trailer park in a minute. Because it's just, once the units are there, there's just a
cash
revenue
flow.
stream forever.
Yeah.
Right, but
So-
if somebody came to the
so-
municipality, with it,
Yeah, right.
that, my point is, someone has to come to the municipality, as you say,
That's
we're
true.
not developers,
But-
right? We can't pick your land and rezone it as a trailer park, right?
We
No, but-
can't, but we can say that a door is open.
Correct,
And that
yeah.
there's interest in having a conversation to
Sure.
explore some
Yeah.
of the possibilities that the community is certainly exploring. They want to think about what would make a tiny home community viable. And, I mean, we can anticipate, the servicing issues and so on. But if people feel as though they can't even get through a door to have that conversation, to figure out some of the details, they're going to be frustrated, and they're not going to let go of a dream that they have, that they feel they haven't been supported. It's better for people to go through and to figure it out and to come to their own conclusions about whether something is viable or not, than to anticipate that it won't be viable.
And I think that's what both of you were talking about, with the regulatory tools to empower the community.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
And I think a can-do attitude is essential. How can we make it work,
Yeah.
instead of looking at all the complications to make it work? And sure, you might go down that road and find out that it doesn't work, that's fine. But at least give it a good shake and have a look at it and say, hey, you know what, there's different ways to do things.
So,
Let's have a look at it.
One thing I want to bring up, because I think we're going through a major shift right now from single-family home thinking,
Yeah.
like cut the thing into 4 pieces and sell it for 1.6 million. But we don't know what the value of condo is. And as soon as that happens in the code, say that area 1 down there,
Mhm.
someone builds it, and then they sell these things for $600,000-$700,000 that we never dreamed they could get. Now we know there's a market for that, and there's an opportunity built into that. And the opportunity is me as a developer or other developers will come here and say, I don't have to cut it all up into little pieces and use up every bit of land.
Yeah.
I can actually and I talked to Murray about this, about Evergreen. If I had Evergreen to do over again today, I'd do 20 condos out on the bluff and leave the
Yeah.
rest alone, hard.
Mhm.
And this is something we're gonna have to think about going
That's
forward.
It's the new world.
Because we're screaming about housing, but nobody's talking about the environment. And I think when we densify, when we find there's a market for denser units, condos and things like that, it leaves room for nature.
Absolutely.
And-
That's why I think the typology conversation is so important.
So-
'Cause I'm not saying we shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, we need to talk about it, and how
We
do you do
need
it?
to
What does it
talk
look
about
like?
it, because all we're talking about now is housing.
Right.
And there's never enough.
Yeah,
And I could have come in with 300 units and everybody would be happier if
Right.
it was 4.
right.
But
But it's just, it's
It's
the.
clustering.
yeah.
The individual or the couple who wants to rent an apartment for $1,000 a month. Where are they in this whole conversation? Because they're getting left out in the cold.
Yeah.
And, yeah, it's a condo or it's a, whatever.
An
but it's-
apartment or something.
Yeah,
And a little rub against the tiny home, like, put them all together in a box and then put them in one place instead of spreading them out all over the land.
Well, you would have, you'd have a
That's just
Tiny
trying to
home village.
holding on to the single family home a little too far.
well, it's an.
There's so many
it's a-
models out there
It's
that
an
we're not
urban
looking at.
solution.
Infrastructure costs.
It's an urban solution, right?
Yeah.
The land is already broken up into these small parcels. Now we want to establish density over that piece of land. How do we do it?
Yeah.
We don't have the same situation here. So we shouldn't be going to the same solution. I think there's a different solution.
There's a Bowen solution.
There's a bonus solution, exactly.
You know, one thing, and I'm going on too much about this, but what happens is over time, here's your big lot, and then pressures force everybody to develop. So we do this, and we do this next generation, and the next generation we do this, and they're all single-family homes. And then the single-family homes come down, the shopping center goes in, and the higher end goes up. And we get to these very dense things at some point in time. I think we should jump a couple generations. I don't want to scare everybody, but let's densify a little bit now and leave this alone.
Right.
Let's just forget chopping it into the 5
Yeah.
acres or 2 acres. And let's do a little condo project over there in the corner and leave the rest.
Yeah, I don't know, density seems to be a 4-letter word on Bowen.
Yeah.
Well, it's gotta change.
But I think it's gonna switch because it
Is that
certainly isn't
changing?
a scary thing right now.
You can't have both, you
We
can't
want
have
density
affordable
everywhere.
housing and not have density.
Yeah.
It's
Exactly.
very simple.
Yeah, the economics are,
Yeah. We do have a 2/3 acre lot, or a 3/4 of an acre lot, zoned for 26,000 square feet, sitting right there in the cove with a great big sign on it.
Mhm.
And I will note to people that we have not found a developer yet who can make the numbers work, right? And the cost of that land compared to city land and the servicing and all that, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is there are an awful lot of challenges in today's marketplace in the lower mainland that are throughout the lower mainland that are affecting.
And there's more challenges on Bowen.
Yeah,
So
so
much.
The biggest challenge with that one is nobody's done it yet.
I know.
Nobody has
You can't
built that
put a
thing
dollar
and
value
sold
on
it. The
the
minute
product.
someone does it and has the guts to do it, and they sell the top floor for 800 grand 3 times, then it's not a challenge anymore.
Right.
But someone's gotta go first, and that's scary.
I nominate you, John.
Huh?
I nominate you.
Get her done, John.
Too big.
Gary Anderson will get her done. Yeah,
Just sort of building on what John was saying about the sort of clustering and saving open space. It's always struck me that we are subdividing these big lots, and a lot of people buy these lots, and then they just basically clear cut them, plant lawns, and you drive down some of the roads and you it's almost like you're in a subdivision on the mainland. And that's always sort of bothered me. It almost seems like we need sort of an urban design aesthetic that sort of makes sure that our major roads are lined with sort of a a landscape buffer and all this kind of stuff. And, I mean, Britain did a marvelous job, and with all their motor
They've been at it a
freeways
long
and
time.
stuff, they manage, you drive through their major freeways, highways, and you don't see development in industrial parks and all this kind of stuff.
They had 2,000 years to do that, though.
Yeah, we'll get to work on that one. guys.
But I think it's an important issue because we can overcome a lot of anti-development
The
sentiment
stigma, yeah.
if we have a strategy of clustering development, preserving open space throughout, without the sort of carving up like we were talking about. It's just somewhere I think we need to start to think about building that into our codes and
It
ordinances.
is. It is. I mean, we do encourage clustering. We do give density bonusing to people who do it. It is cheaper to service your land if you put all of the lots together. I mean, we've got many, many, many examples on Bowen where you've got a bunch of 1 acre lots along the waterfront and 100 acres behind of undeveloped land and so on. I mean, we do that. And again, we react. We aren't the developer. The property owner has to come to us. I mean, Maureen is working on the housing authority or housing charrettes and that sort of thing, or forums, and I think a lot of those ideas will come out of that. It'll make the discussion more open for people to come to us with their ideas on their property. Yes?
Yeah, could I maybe just speak about that a little bit, just?
Sure, may as well, and then we'll try to wrap it up.
So I was given direction by council to develop a program, either a series of speakers or an event. And I've gone ahead and started that. So tomorrow, council has a committee of the whole meeting, and we're reviewing all of the work that has been done on Bowen to date. And also there's material related to the regional, provincial, federal context as far as housing is concerned, some of the local jurisdictions, so all of the North Shore municipalities, Islands Trust, a couple of other topics, and we'll get through that. And it will bring council collectively sort of to the same place, I think, in terms of understanding the work that's been done previously. The next event is, we have a speaker coming, Jada Bassi from City Spaces, and she'll be talking about municipal policy tools for affordable housing in rural communities. And I've seen her give a version of this presentation at a conference I attended last fall, and she's extremely good. She's a great speaker, she's very knowledgeable. She's just recently done some engagement work in the village of Lumbee, lots of experience in the area. Daniel and I have been talking about injecting an element of local solutions into this housing series. So one of the local solutions we have for housing issues is we passed the detached secondary suites bylaw. It's a huge accomplishment. 10 years later, we have that. And I met a while back with somebody who has gone ahead and built her detached secondary suite, asked her what the process was like. She shared some of that with me. I asked in social media if people were interested in hearing more about this, because we've got the policy tool, there's a certain amount of uptake. There's no real municipal financial investment in creating detached secondary suites. There's some municipal time, there's guidance and so forth. 30-odd people responded with, I'm interested in finding out more about this. So we'll have a local solutions session, and there may be some others that sort of fit that bill. Tiny homes has come up. Invite people who are interested in tiny homes. Like, what does that mean? It looks great on TV when you're watching Tiny House Nation. Is it really that great? Yeah. What
Only if
are
you're tiny.
what are the challenges? And
Still a
then
roof over your head.
the sort of center of this was some sort of consultation event, and it hasn't really taken firm shape yet, but I've spoken with people from BC Housing, and they're confirmed they will come if we host this on the 5th of May. That's the date I proposed. people from the BC Nonprofit Housing Association. They're happy to send one of their senior policy analysts to come and talk about the larger picture. Here's the issues in the province and beyond. And they're going to have just released a major report about 4 daes before they would come to vote. So they're going to have something newsworthy that they can talk about. The Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, I cornered her at another event, and we chatted for a while, and if she can fit it in, and we're working on that, she'll come to vote to talk about the provincial context. So there are a number of pieces that are sort of moving along, and they're the external pieces. The challenge I was facing was, what's the internal piece? Now, who is it in the community who comes and talks and has some expertise or has some passion for certain aspects of housing and community lands use? And it's sounding to me as though some of the conversation here could fit in, like I'm creating the shape, but I need some more content, local content, and a structure, the charrette structure, yes, but there's some other stuff that needs to be going on here. Kathy's looking into seeing if there's a facilitator who would be available so that there's some continuity through. I was thinking a day, but it sounds as from this discussion that it might be 2 days that would make more sense. And then there'll be some other events associated with this that will kind of evolve depending on what the interests are. There's been a lot of interest expressed in the community already, and I'm just sort of being a bit of a sponge and listening for what the topics are that people want to hear about or want to give feedback on, and have that inform the discussions that we're having at the council table. So I have a shell.
Sounds great.
I need you to fill it.
Yeah, so and that's the thing, so there's a lot of things that are happening outside of coming to you with a subdivision or a rezoning application. We're working with a lot of people on council and other committees working in a lot of different directions towards what will ultimately be the same end, we think. Hopefully, as John said, you come at it from different directions and different ways, but you end up at the final spot that makes sense for the community. Right? Sweet spot. Sorry, do you want to?
It just, in the concept, and I appreciate what you're saying, Maureen, I think this sounds quite exciting, actually. You're getting the right people coming here to speak to the community. This is a little bit back to what we were talking about before, but I don't want to quite let it go. I think it's important as we talk about, because I think there is a misunderstanding about what density is, and my conversation about typology sounds very sort of broad, but really it's about, you can. My wife happens to be from her family's in Switzerland, so we spend quite a bit of time there. And actually, this medieval town that they live in is pretty dense. Walking streets, and the buildings are this far apart, and there aren't big gaps between them. And it's an amazing environment. So, density isn't necessarily a nasty thing if the buildings are beautifully built. And it doesn't take much to make a building beautiful, also to make it livable. And I must say that the first thing that ever came to us as an advisory planning commission, and we're not in a design capacity, so we can, I made a general comment, but I was disappointed to see that while this was destined to be worker housing of some kind, the apartments didn't have any outdoor space. There were no balconies. I don't know, for a long time, the work that I did as an architect was in multifamily, and there are, BC Housing won't let you build under their umbrella without a balcony. And they tell you how big it has to be depending on how big the unit is. So it seemed to me a little bit kind of, I guess where I'm going with this is that there are some very simple design guidelines that could be attached to a zoning that would be more dense, but that would really get people thinking, oh, this could actually be okay. It doesn't have to be a really onerous design guideline, but just a few simple things. You must have outdoor balconies, the massing of the building must be broken up every, I don't know, 24 feet or something, so you don't have just big blocks of building. Simple things that can make a huge difference in the built environment. And I think the municipality could take a leadership role in that. Rework the design guidelines for the code, which are so outdated that, they're happy, but they're kind of, I'm not sure they're 2018.
What would it take to get that done?
Yeah,
I'm so fed up at looking at the
craftsman style
artwork
from
in the,
1998.
Right.
but what would it take?
Well, you need a consultant, you have to hire a consultant to rework the design guidelines. Architectural firms do that, and so you put an RFP together,
Let's put that in the budget.
I'm just saying, that's, it's work. It's not, I don't know that you're gonna get a group of volunteers to come together and do that for you. You could put it out there and see. I think you can craft the scope of work so it isn't too onerous. And a lot of work that has already come before could be brought into it. James Tour's work, some of the other things, that there's some thinking around that's already happened. And I guess that the final piece there is really about developments need services. And the municipality's a little short on money and short on services. So I don't know how John feels about it, but I've lived for a number of years in Nanaimo. We had development cost charges there.
Yeah.
There was an assumed thing when you were going to build something, you were going to pay DCCs, and it generated funds to assist in the provision of the services that are needed. And I think it's, I suspect that in the context of the things we're talking about tonight, it's time to start thinking about that.
Yeah.
Well, we've been thinking about it. We've been real close to it for a real long time.
Yeah, well, close.
We have to
And
get
we've
there.
been close to a solution that snuck over a long time too.
Yeah, well, but things are happening. Very close. That's the thing, is that things are happening.
Yeah,
Not complete. Well, of course, though, it almost seems that no matter how much is happening, people say nothing's happening. When you drive up that street and you think what it looked like, and somebody mentioned at your meeting, I think it might have been you, that talking about we should worry about Snug Cove not dying by having another place for people to put businesses. And I was thinking, hold on, this thing is booming. When you think about what Snug Cove looked like in 1992, when we began this discussion of Snug Cove is dying, it was pretty damn dead. So anyway, but I think we should wrap it up. Do we have a consensus here? Do you think that we should have a subcommittee that would get together and work to find a facilitator and figure out the scope and work out timing and the composition of attendees and that sort of thing? Is there anybody here who would be willing to work on such a committee?
I would.
Okay.
I would.
Dennis?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Only if Dan don't come.
The kiss of death, eh? Yeah.
I go with Kathy tells me to go.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. I wonder,
Love
do you
you,
think
Dan.
there are any other people on the APC that would want to be involved with that, or?
You might want
Yeah,
to.
David might be, yeah.
David might.
Yeah.
David Hawking.
Hawking.
David Hawking.
So he's not going to be back until the middle of March.
No, it's only 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Okay. So is that, should we call that a subcommittee and carry on? Do you need anything on that?
Well, one thing what really resonated with me was the need for regulatory tools.
For what?
Regulatory tools to empower our community. And that's something I'd like to have further conversations about. Do some brainstorming on something like that as well, whether it's part of this group or maybe another APC meeting that Daniel and I can attend.
You're always welcome.
Regulatory.
I mean,
tools.
DCCs is
Yeah,
what you're
no,
talking about?
through,
Guidelines.
yeah, land use bylaw, through the OCP, mostly the land use bylaws.
Yeah.
Right.
The OCP is very restrictive and sort of prevents the, or appears to prevent the
Densification.
opening of anything.
Densification.
Densification or, different zoning or.
Oh, well, we look to amend it from time to time. And we try to be careful to go through and make sure that we are finding all of the things that do apply and note that they are being changed, right? That there's, so we don't end up with, in 10 years, an OCP that has 12 contradictory things throughout it. Always kind of embarrassing. Right?
Well, that is something we're gonna have to look at with, when the next council is in place. It's gonna be time for another OCP update legally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great. Okay.
2010, it's a long time ago.
Yeah.
So now,
So
Okay.
we also have a council resolution regarding community engagement on the community lands. And
Mhm.
tomorrow, I believe, there's a meeting of the communications folks, including Sue Ellen,
Mhm.
to talk about that. So there's some overlap going
Mhm.
on here. And I guess we'll iron it out as we go forward.
That- I was just gonna say, that would maybe, it's a really short notice, but that would be something where if we had somebody from the APC also involved with it.
Are you around tomorrow, Dennis?
No, no pressure on anybody.
I'm missing. Whoa, wait a second, okay.
I thought it was worth throwing
When
out.
what?
I think it's tomorrow at 3, isn't it?
Tomorrow?
We're, yeah, I'm gonna be EBC.
Here at EDC. Okay.
At UBC?
No, here.
it's here.
Here.
That's where I'm gonna be.
Oh, you'll be at ABC.
Yeah.
If it's not convenient, it's too short.
You can be here, Dennis.
I don't know.
We'll leave the invitation open.
Okay, an open invitation, yeah.
But I think one of the ideas of this meeting was not the intent that the APC be the workhorses here. But what I really like is brainstorming, right? And, because I think we're all looking for the same kind of solutions. We're looking to see how we can move forward with this and support our community that we all have a passion for.
Yeah, exactly. And my first comments about, I see the APC, playing a role in
Yeah,
all this, a big role,
absolutely.
because I think that everybody in the APC are very engaged in the community and interested. But probably it isn't, a full-blown leadership role.
Exactly, yeah.
That's.
Yeah, I agree, yeah. Yeah, and what I like listening tonight is the diversity of opinions on the APC as well.
Right, yeah, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was jotting down little titles of set pieces that could be delivered, because there were a lot of chunks of information just as well as the back and forth. Your focus on typology, I think would
Yeah.
actually be quite a good piece to share with people.
Well, I personally think it's a very interesting conversation. And can go in two completely different directions.
I'm gonna go home and Google it with a glass of wine.
So is there a
Yeah.
does a recommendation need to be made to take to council to see if we want to do this?
Yeah. Well, I don't, maybe it's premature, should we?
I think that it can come back to, I have to bring back to council a plan for this housing thing. And this could be embedded
Yeah.
in the housing series, because what
Yeah.
I've got to do is I've got to get the schedule together, and I've got to get the budget together, and then Gary, he wanted to see it, and Allison in particular wanted to see what was going to be
We
outlined.
need to fill that shell.
I need to fill that shell, so if you guys fill the shell, I'll get it forward and get it okay.
Yeah.
Because when council agrees, hopefully, to do this, then it can be made public, that's gonna happen. And that's the day that everybody relaxes.
But March 12th, it'll come to council March 12th.
My one just fear is I wouldn't want we have a facilitated event on community lands that it be totally encompassed in the housing series program, because we don't want people just coming with that mindset necessarily. Right, I want to be like, why are we building a fire hall? We're here to talk about housing or
Yeah.
whatever it may be.
Got it.
It's just that it's couched.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
So
Yeah.
community
Yeah,
lands
kind of.
focus
Yeah.
rather than housing as
Yeah,
such.
yeah.
So now that it's freestanding, do we need a resolution to dissolve it? What I'm getting at is I agree completely with Daniel that if we're talking about community lands and we're communicating that we're talking about a charrette to look at long-term planning for community lands, we can't really say it's within
Yeah.
our housing strategy without biasing what we, and then we can't say, and by the way, we're not gonna do any housing on it. Maybe it wouldn't, it puts a bias on it that we can't do. I don't think, I think Daniel's point's very good there.
Okay, so we need a resolution.
Can we make a resolution?
I don't know if we can make
Yeah.
one.
The mayor's standing committee meets on
Monday.
Monday?
So do it through our committee.
What I
Yeah.
suggest is maybe we can, and, because I don't know about the rest of you, but right now my brain's shut down. And the idea of crafting a resolution right now, but maybe we could work on it and pass it through the Mayor's Standing Committee, forward it to the APC also to look at.
Yeah.
And we go from there.
If there is a meeting of the APC in a timely manner, they could be,
There's not
We
one
only-
March 19th.
We just met Monday.
Yeah.
so-
Well,
Okay.
what we could do is,
Sure.
we can, once we have a resolution crafted, forward to the APC and do basically an email poll
Yeah,
showing support, which you can ratify at a
Yeah.
future meeting. But just getting your input on it. I mean, and if I just say one more thing, the other thing I really heard tonight is the need for the Cove to be the hub. You know, you really said it. I don't know if hub was your word. but-
No, well, a service center,
Yeah. Yeah.
for, the things that need to be near transportation, which isn't everybody.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
My wife
Doesn't preclude
on that
other-
one, I'll tell you, 'cause she's always saying to me, why do you have to put every bloody thing in the Cove with people?
Yeah.
in it?" I said, because people want a dynamic village atmosphere. But anyway, that's the discussion. Or one aspect of it. So I think our work here is
Are we
done.
done?
Well done.
We are adjourned.
Well done.
Thank you.
That was good.